So thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name's Rich Beer. I'm Development Director of England Hockey, and my colleague Zach Ferris is here. We've been working on the return to play guidelines. Many of you are probably familiar with us updating you when we can about the various changes. I think whilst we're all hoping for this to be the last update we give, I think we're realistic it may not be. So just to cover off what we're going to talk through this afternoon, it'll be a fairly brief presentation. We're just going to cover off the headings of what's in the guidance. The guidance has been on our website since yesterday, so if you haven't seen it yet, you're probably worth going away and looking at it and reading through what there is. But there's a few bits of context we want to give and just a bit more information we want to give as we go along. So we'll roughly cover these areas. In terms of questions, feel free to put anything in the chat function as we go along. Equally, we'll be doing some Q&A at the end where you can put your hand up using the hand up function if you want to, and we'll answer as many questions as we can depending on how difficult they are during the session after the presentation. As I said, the first presentation will take probably not more than 10-15 minutes or so. So just to set the scene a bit from my perspective, I think thanks to all your good work around the country, when we've been able to play, we've been able to prove that outdoor sport is very safe to take part in. Nothing's really changed with that. Whilst there are concerns about the Delta variant being more transmissible, in principle, what we're seeing is in sort of outdoor sports scenarios, there's no evidence and no update we're getting from any other NGB about that being a bigger issue. Obviously, when we were able to return, sport returned very quickly outdoors, but indoor activities were restricted and were restricted more. So as we start to look for the future, that will be something we hope will continue to be the case, and that the outdoor sport will be well protected. What we would say though is that with case rates as they are, and I'll come onto this a bit more, you know, there are people who feel very differently about these experiences, and even more so with this guidance, there'll be venues that will take different interpretations of the guidance. So we're going to need to manage quite hard people's expectations and how normal things will be. And many of you will already be familiar with that in the last couple of days of how things vary according to different shops you go into or different locations that you go into, or even simply where people will, for example, wear masks or won't, or how comfortable people will be gathering in larger groups. So just to say thank you for following the guidance. We, you know, as a sport, as always, I think we've done ourselves proud in terms of people's efforts to do it. And the amount of hockey that people have managed to get on, particularly for young players who've missed a lot of hockey over the course of this summer period. We're really, really grateful for your efforts, and I know that the players are really grateful for all the sports done to keep going. So just moving on, we thought this was worth sharing. We shared something like this previously when we did a survey, but we've had some information from Sport England about a recent survey that they've undertaken amongst the general population around returning to activity in general. And I think it's these, you know, the big proportion of people who don't yet feel comfortable that we all, as always, need to bear in mind in our clubs and our activities, whether they're players or parents, that will feel differently about what we're putting on, and we need to be sort of empathetic and understanding of people's different feelings at the moment. So as the bullet points there say, there's still real concern around the risk of the virus, understandably, and a real concern about the risk to the country as a whole, and the impact it will have on other people, if not directly to you as an individual. Still very serious concerns about people with a health condition, and still worried about leaving the house to be active. And you know, there's a lot of people with health conditions. That's a big proportion of the community who are still uncomfortable about taking part in activity as a result. And not a lot of trust around as well, which I think is the other thing to bear in mind. So we're going to see, as a result of the restrictions lifting, people reacting very differently to that. You know, definitely not a sort of return to normal life in the eyes of most people for some time yet, which is probably obvious to everyone on the call. But I think as Zach starts to talk about the guidance, this is particularly important to bear in mind, because we're moving to a period where obviously the guidance relaxes massively, but the feelings and the attitudes of people have not necessarily changed. So we just wanted to give you this as a bit of context up front, but I'll hand over to Zach for a bit more detail on what the latest changes are.
Thank you, Rich. Yep. So just going into the more detail of the guidance itself. So what's changed? Basically, essentially from Monday the 19th of July, the government confirmed we'd moved to the step 4, the roadmap out of lockdown. This saw an end to most legal restrictions. And in terms of sport and our previous guidance, the two big things that impacted us were the social distancing and the legal gathering limits, which have both now gone. So in terms of numbers of people allowed at a session, people spectating, the indoor versus the outdoor game, all those restrictions have now gone, so it makes it a lot easier for us managing that moving forward. As part of the change, we've adapted our guidance. We've actually produced a new document now called Managing COVID Within Hockey. It was published yesterday and is available on the website, and we'll talk through a bit of the detail shortly on that. And two of the big changes in terms of the requests and the requirements that were put on yourselves previously was the need for participation agreements from all people participating in the sport. This is now no longer required with the new guidance, as is the need for sending attendance registers to England Hockey. So we no longer need to receive those from you, but as we'll touch on later, we think it's good practice to keep up your attendance registers at sessions. So now moving on to the actual guidance itself. So as mentioned, we've released a new guidance document called Managing COVID Within Hockey. That means that the step 4 and 5 guidance you previously followed is no longer applicable. So we're thankful that that 20-odd page document is now no longer required. It's a much leaner 4-page document, so hopefully easier for people to follow as well and get into the detail of that. So within that document, there's an introduction that covers off sort of the things we've discussed already on this call. The key changes, as I've just covered off there, around legal requirements for number of people meeting and social distancing. And then we go into 3 sections on what we still require as a governing body for people to participate, our recommendations for what we see as good practice and where people can keep improving the practice to help reduce the risk of transmission of COVID-19, and the government guidance around their particular elements that they're keen to see as well. We've also got resources section in there, so where there's further guidance available. So in terms of an England Hockey requirement, we do still require to have COVID officers registered. So any club or organisation participating in the sport must register a COVID officer. The main reason for this is for us to maintain our communications. Should there be changes to guidance in the future, we need to have that point of contact that we can relate to and set up these forums as appropriate. It's also really useful for club-to-club contact. So we've talked already about managing expectations and experiences, especially when you're hosting other teams, not just your own club, but letting them know in the communication we'll have with them on what to expect when they arrive to the venue, because within the guidance there is a degree of flexibility, so venue to venue could be very different. And as before, we would still appreciate you keeping up that responsibility to apply the guidance within your club settings and monitor how that's being managed. Moving on to some of our recommendations. So this is linked to the good practices, as mentioned before. These are the key headlines that when you look into the detailed guidance document yourself, these are the key headings we've got along there. So as previously mentioned, attendance registers, there's no longer a requirement to issue those and send them into England Hockey, but we do see it as a good way of keeping a record of who's attending your sessions, and that may help with track and trace efforts in the future, as well as any player welfare requirements. The COVID risk assessments specific to COVID, we think there's value still in completing these to make sure you're aware of the risk and to try and limit the risk of transmission of COVID, but it also helps give others confidence in returning if they know you've done this work in the background. The Planning Safe Hockey Guide, this has been a guide we've shared for a while now, but we're going to keep pushing it. It's really important now that we think about the policies and the procedures we've got in place when we're planning to deliver hockey in this current climate. So in terms of safeguarding and the welfare of others, it's really important to refer to this. Venue protocols and safety measures. So we've mentioned a few times that actually venues have a bit more flexibility now to put in their own measures. It's not all law as it was previously. So some venues may choose to implement the wearing of face masks in internal areas, or still require QR codes to check in via NHS test and trace. These sort of things are down to the venue, and it's up to you guys as clubs and as venues to decide how you manage these and communicate them out. And that rolls into the next point, communication. We really want to help manage the expectations and experiences of people. This is something that's worked really well so far. So when people are arriving to new venues that they're not used to, are there one-way routes around the venue? Are there particular rules for when you're indoors? Have you got capacity limits? All these things just help people before they arrive know what to expect, rather than getting there and then, oh, we do this differently at our club, etc., etc. The respectful practices one is something that we've really tried to push. So something like the stick tap as an alternative to shaking hands. This has gone down really well in the community, and it's something that again just avoids that risk of of hand touching. Spitting is still to be discouraged, particularly given the risk of infection, as we know that's where it comes from. And again, being mindful of your distance, and when you're communicating with people like officials, there's no need to get up into their face and be aggressive. You know, we need to think about our culturally how we're going to be respectful to those people, as well as actually the risk that poses through COVID. We've touched on it a few times now about support and awareness of others. Everyone will be feeling slightly different in their response to COVID and how they come back to hockey. So it's just being aware and helping to support people feel confident. So easing their anxiety and nervousness whilst at hockey day. We want people to play hockey to enjoy it. So please help them in their returning. Competition guidance. This will become more prevalent as we get into the season itself. So looking at stuff around if there'll be a number of people isolating, that means you can't fulfill a fixture. So there'll be more detail to come on that. We haven't released the guidance specifically, but we're just making you aware that we will send out some guidance to help support competitions and leagues as they restart. And the last one on our recommendations is around the residential camps and multiple team day tournaments. So where we know there's going to be large numbers of people in a site coming from different areas of the country, staying over for a prolonged period, there's further guidance linked to the government guidance around events and attractions that can be used to help administer and try and really reduce the risk even further. That covers off our England hockey recommendations and good practice. Then into the government guidance. So again, similarly, these are the headline bullet points from what we've put in our main document that the government are encouraging. The message is really around caution, and even though we've started to unlock further, we need to take our time in getting around to the new normal as it is. So self-assessment before COVID-19 symptoms before sessions. This is something we had in there before. So making sure that people are doing self-assessments for those three main symptoms, which are high temperature, new continuous cough, and a loss of or change to your sense of smell or taste. This is really important. It can prevent people attending sessions with symptoms that can then spread it, which moves into the informed decisions and self-isolation. So there's been a lot of push from government to put responsibility on people to make their own informed decisions. So if you know you're not feeling great or you're under the weather, you need to make decisions that are sensible that might impact others that are attending these sessions. And if you do need to self-isolate, they are still asking people to self-isolate to help reduce the spread of COVID. NHS test and trace is still in place, and this is something we mentioned earlier. Although it's no longer a legal requirement to collect participants' contact details, activity organisers and venues may still wish to display NHS QR codes and encourage people to check in just to support the government's efforts at test and trace. Pre-participation safety measures, this is around testing. So if it's possible, you may ask people to do a test and have a negative result before they attend sessions or games. You might also consider using the NHS COVID pass, which is a new thing that allows people to demonstrate where they're a lower risk of carrying or transmitting COVID, whether it's through vaccination, a negative test result, or natural immunity, having had COVID recently. The next ones are a bit more common from the past guidance, so they're still in place around hygiene. So good cleaning practices, cleaning the frequent touch points and key surfaces that people will come into contact with, encouraging people to bring their own water bottles, kit and equipment where possible, so there's no contamination through sharing. And when it comes to equipment, if you do need to share equipment, try to make sure it's cleaned in between users so it's not frequently touched by different people without being cleaned. Face coverings is, as we know, there's still a lot of encouragement to wear these in public settings and in internal settings especially. So some venues may look to implement this. Medical provision, so around physios and medical personnel when they're treating. If you're in close proximity to someone, you may wear your face mask. Cleaning and disinfecting equipment before treating people is important, and then post-treatment, washing your hands and sanitizing thoroughly to make sure there's no risk continued from there. And then facility usage is the big one we've referred to. So whether the facility themselves wants to carry out risk assessments, providing adequate ventilation to make sure that enclosed spaces have got a supply of fresh air, cleaning the surfaces. So how as a venue can you be best prepared to help support the efforts to reduce the risks? And lastly is the sporting event. So when organising a larger event, so if it's from our recommendation, we said about the large tournaments or residential stays, there's a further government guidance available via our document that shows guidance for events and attractions. So how can you mitigate the risk at large capacity events? So that covers off those three main areas in our new guidance document. And the last section is on resources. So our COVID support page is fully up to date now. This includes the full guidance document. Our latest FAQs can be found via the link shown on the screen or via the support page as well. Again, these have all been updated based on questions we've been receiving over the last couple of days as people are anticipating the guidance coming out. Off the back of this session and the one we have this evening, we'll also collate the questions we receive, and we'll use those to further update the FAQs, and they will continue to be monitored to be live and as up to date as possible. If you're still struggling and need some support from us, please email clubs@englandhockey.co.uk. We'll support you where we can, and we'll continue our communications with COVID officers and participants, so awareness of latest guidance, any changes and what's expected. And then lastly, the government do have useful resources and links to NHS off of their specific coronavirus website as shown on the screen. So that's it for the main guidance and the key areas that we'll be covering in that guidance that's available online. I'll hand back to Rich now to summarise the session today.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, so I mean, Zach's covered it all in good detail, really. I think main messages are, you know, we know hockey outdoors is safe, and that the settings that you created as clubs and providers are safe, but we recognise that anxiety is there for people to be involved, and hopefully that's something you can take account of too in the way you're communicating to people and planning to do things. I think the massive challenge as I see it is that there's likely to be different interpretations of government guidance in different settings and different organisations, and I think that can create some tension between people. And you may have, you know, schools who have different expectations to the community club or to a leisure centre. So that's really something that's going to be tricky, I think, for us to manage. And we're happy to hear where that's a difficulty and see if we can help. But, you know, most of the legal restrictions have been ended. And so what you'll hopefully find in our guidance is very little you have to do and plenty of good practice and guidance that we think is the right thing to do in the circumstances. So please look at that guidance, please understand it, but it's nowhere near as complicated or as difficult as what you've had to deal with previously. And where we can, we've removed all the restrictions and the information we have. We just feel, as we said, that making sure that all organisations have a COVID officer is wise if any restrictions need to be reintroduced. So we're here to help if we can. We'll aim to communicate in a timely way if anything changes, and we're grateful for all the work you've done. Yeah, I just once again for those that are on the call, just to say thank you very much for all you've done and the sensible questions that help us with our FAQs. And you know, there's a way to go, obviously, before we're fully through all of this. Nobody knows how long, and so we'll continue to update you as best we can when we have guidance. And please bear with us where we are restricted in how much clarity we have because of how much clarity we're being given. That's just the world we've lived in for what, nearly 18 months now, and I think there'll be a little while longer to go. You know, all our fingers are crossed for a good and more successful season next year, but we are making provision to try and cope with any other interruptions or anything else we might face. As I said at the start, outdoor sport was very robust through the last changes, and we hope that it will be the same this time, but there's some twists and turns in the road in the next few months, I suspect. So thanks everyone for your time, and hopefully you can enjoy your summer.